Dear church, let's talk about Bi-Vocational ministry. Hello, welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Excited about our guest today. Denny Howell is with us all the way from Ooltewah. Is that right? Yeah. Oh, awesome.
Very nice.
Yeah. And he brought his friend. I guess we're friends too. I'm looking off camera at Jake Sutton. Y'all remember Jake. He's a good buddy of mine that's been on the podcast as well. Just say something, Jake.
Howdy, howdy.
Howdy, howdy. All the way from Georgia. So glad to have you guys. This was kind of a last second deal where we were just going to do this remotely. And you said, why don't we just come up and see the new work at Walnut Street and hang out a little bit. So I'm excited about that. And I just appreciate everyone tuning in today. I'm going to talk about something I've wanted to talk about for a while, because I believe that bivocational ministry is something that is sorely needed, especially with our lack of preachers today. We need guys that are willing to kind of do double duty, I guess. And these are the guys that are in the trenches, the guys that are, they're trying to do a secular job and also trying to do the work for the church. And you're one of those. Before we jump into some questions that I have for you, just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your family, and also tell us a little bit about the work you do outside of the church.
So I've been at Ooltewah for right around 14 years that I've been working with them. So I've been preaching, doing different things for close to 20. But when I started working with the youth at Ooltewah, I was working in management for FedEx Ground. So I was doing that. I did that for over 13 years. And then as I started getting deep into ministry, the funny thing is I didn't want to be in ministry. I grew up around the church. Mom was secretary for 20 plus years. Dad was a deacon and an elder, and I saw things I shouldn't have and heard things. And so I had decided I was not going to do the ministry route as much as people wanted me to. So I went and got my business degree, did all that. Well, when I got into it, a fire was lit and I loved it. So opportunity presented itself that with FedEx, you're able to buy into having contracts with them. So I started my own business and bought in with a guy that sold me 4 semi trucks and 4 routes. And so I built it up from there. So that's what I do on the side. So I have my own business that now I've got about 12 semis and I've got about 17 drivers that work for me on that. So the biggest question I get a lot of times, especially when people find out that I've got that, is how do you find the time to do all that you do?
Yeah.
But that's what we do. So I've got the church full time that I work with there at Ooltewah, and then have the business that's running full time as well.
Yeah. And I guess I should say this. Ooltewah is outside of Chattanooga, right?
Yeah, right outside Chattanooga, next to Volkswagen.
Yeah, okay. So people are probably wondering geographically where that's at. So we want to make that clear. So discuss that a little bit. How do you find the time?
Balance. Yeah. Balance is what it is. It's fun. One thing that I do enjoy is the flexibility.
Yeah.
It's one reason I did it. It's got its drawbacks in that I can get calls all hours of the night, just like I can with ministry, but with drivers out on the road and different things, I'm the guy that they're going to call.
Yeah.
But it's really where it comes down to is a lot of balance, managing the time that I spend with family, ministry, and the work. And it gets tough sometimes.
Yeah, because the buck kind of stops with you in both of those, whether it be the preaching side of things or with, I know the elders and all that, but I assume the congregation you're at is fairly good size.
It is. We run on Sundays around 200. Our membership's about 250. I actually have a co-minister, part-time minister that works with us. He works for the school system, so he's bivocational as well.
Yeah.
So he's a principal. He's an assistant high school principal up in a town about 20 minutes north of us. So it's interesting that Ooltewah's been blessed to have 2 bivocational preachers that are working under the same roof.
That is interesting. And so for the most part, it's worked. You talk about the balance of it and all that. I'm sure there are challenges. What is the biggest challenge when it comes to doing bivocational ministry?
There's a couple. The one is the balance of time. Mm-hmm. Time is difficult. Yeah. You wish you had more time in the day to do things. And if you don't balance your time right, something is going to get missed, neglected, And unfortunately, a hard part of it is making sure you're keeping your family at the forefront of everything, because the ministry is demanding a lot. You've also got the job, you've got this business that's demanding a lot. So you don't want to push your family to the side. So if you're not balancing correctly, you can get in a bad shape in a hurry.
Yeah. So like a work week.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask you this first. So what are your responsibilities? Are you preaching both sermons on Sunday, teaching Bible class, doing the Devo on Wednesday night? I mean, what are your responsibilities?
The way we've got it worked up, so with Eric, he helps with preaching and teaching.
Okay.
So that's his responsibility. So that's kind of his wheelhouse there. So what it does is it allows me to do a lot more behind the scenes. So I do preach every week. So the way our schedule works is if I preach Sunday morning, he'll preach Sunday night, and then the next week we flop it. Gotcha. And then, of course, we're both teaching classes, but I do a lot more with the youth, families, spending more time during the week doing different classes during the week. We've got a Tuesday class. So I do all the workings of what you would call a full-time minister, except I get a little bit of a break Sunday with not having to do both lessons. I only have to do one.
It would seem to me that, many times I hear preachers tell me that, they come into a congregation and they kind of cover everything, to the point that, the elders are left wondering what they're supposed to do. The deacons are left wondering what they're supposed to do. The members even, we hired a preacher to do that. It would seem to me that the bi-vocational side of things encourages others, or forces others perhaps even, to pick up the slack, because you just can't do it all.
You would think. You would think.
Not necessarily.
Early on, again, it comes back to the problem of the balance of time. Mm-hmm. I'm one that would just do it. Yeah. I'd get it done. I would get it done. The longer I've been in this, and the more, I was seeing what it was doing to taking time away from the family. Right. You've got to learn to delegate, and to try to get other ones in there to give them tasks to do to build their leadership qualities. And so wisdom has come trial and error, I guess you could say, through the years. But now it's doing a lot more delegating out. And the elders have done really good too, as far as sitting down saying, hey, let's get some others involved.
Great.
Let's work on this. So that's been good. Another drawback that you've got in it that plays a factor is sometimes you do have a problem with identity. One is you're working, you're doing all this, you don't get to do some of the things that other preachers get to do all the time, of getting to go to school, do the training, do different things. That's a time constraint that is very hard. I've been trying to get my master's done, and it's one of those things that with everything going on, you just don't have the time. And so that affects, sometimes that hurts your identity as a preacher sometimes, because you don't get to do some of the things that other preachers that's all they're doing get to do. So am I being effective in my preaching? Am I being truly effective in my teaching? Because you are pulled in so many different directions during the week.
Yeah, I would think that there might, if you're not careful, there would be a certain amount of guilt that you feel for
you're not being able to be the best you can be.
Yeah.
If you had the training and you were able to sit in your office for 20 hours a week and just read and do all that. So sometimes it does creep in if you're not careful.
I'll have people tell me who teach a Bible class, some of our members, they'll teach a Bible class or something else, and they'll say, I don't know how you do it. And I'm like, well, I get to do this solely each week, sit down and focus on a sermon or focus on a lesson, where you're trying to do that as well as your other job. And it's certainly heightened with you. And I hear you talk about balance, which I believe is key in all of ministry, is striking that balance. For you, it's going to be even more so. Sounds like to me, you have to draw some boundaries. You have to learn to say no to some things that may be even good things, but you still have to.
And I'm a yes man. I don't like to tell people no. Yeah. If I can at all possible be there, I want to be there. If I can do it, I want to be able to do it. But you learn in this. You've got to you've got to guard some things. You've got to guard your time with family. You've got to guard your study time.
Sure.
You've got to guard your time to a degree to keep that balance. And so that's going to require you to go, I'm sorry, I can't do this today.
Yeah.
And that's tough. But to go back to, when people ask full-time preachers that are in the office and doing, that's where a bivocational preacher, I guess, helps with a little bit healthier environment because you're in the trenches with the congregation.
Right.
They can't look at you and go, well, you're in the office 40 hours a week and you don't have to be here where we get the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm doing the same thing you're doing, but I'm still trying to maintain this balance to be the man of God that I need to be.
Yeah.
And so it brings a trust. It brings, it also brings stability to the church.
And you're setting an example. This is the way,
So
you're trying to do it. Yeah. You've talked about balance. Talk about your work week. What does that look like? So if you're going to sit down, you're going to work on a sermon, you're going to work on a Bible class, how do you get all that work done during the week? How do you delineate your time in order to get that? And we've talked about in our 10 questions for 10 preachers, what does a typical work week look like? And the response has always been, well, what's typical, right? So you probably don't have a typical, but if you could make it typical, what would that look like?
Typical is usually Mondays. Mondays are gauged more towards the business.
Yeah.
To where I will try to get everything lined up for the week. It's kind of my break day from ministry work to a degree.
Right.
I'll still do some work on Mondays, but usually Monday, the focus, the gear is making sure everything's good to go on the business side of the house.
Okay.
Then Monday, latter part of Monday into Tuesday is preparing for the class that I teach on Monday or Tuesday afternoons. So deal with that. So there's a lot of study time that goes in there preparing for that. And then after the class is over on Tuesday, the gears shift towards preparing for Wednesday, and then also the sermon prep is going in. And then usually Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is geared towards the visiting to go see people, talk to people, call them. And usually my sermon prep is, since I only got to really work on one sermon, it's usually I take those several days to really dive into to what I'm preaching on and working on the manuscript, working on what I'm wanting to project on Sunday. And then Thursday and Friday, especially Friday, is really dwindling that down to a hard outline. And then Saturday, usually dedicated to family most of the day. And then Saturday night, I'll take some time. That's when I'll do my PowerPoint of just kind of refresher going into Sunday morning. So that's typically the work week. As far as that, now every week's a different week because I don't know what work is going to do.
Yeah.
I could have quiet weeks, and then I can have weeks where it's just busy. So it just really depends. But that's usually typical what I try to stay in to focus on. To give you a little bit different thing, I know with Eric, one thing he does is he gets up, I think around 4:45 in the mornings, and that's his time that he spends during the week in study and prep and all that before he goes and starts his work day. Of course, he's a little bit more structured in his time than what I am. So I'm a little bit more of a hybrid of that. I've got some flexibility. Others, again, it really comes to guarding your schedule and telling people no, being able to. Some guys struggle with that, and therefore it causes burnout.
You got to master your minutes, don't you?
You do.
Yeah. I've learned this in talking with other friends of mine that are bivocational ministers is that, although they have not told me, I've learned this, that it's not like you're doing a part-time job here and a part-time job here. You're really doing 2 full-time jobs. And then you add your full-time job as a husband and a father, 3 full-time jobs. And talk a little bit about how perception of the congregation. So how do you help them in their perception that, look, maybe you have to remind, I don't know, here and there that, look, I wish I had more time to give to this, but I just don't. That, because I assume in ministry, I've learned, Jake could say this as well, I know you've learned it as well, that people will take as much as you give of them, right? And I'm not trying to be harsh there. So you do have to, build a hedge around some things. Talk about how you help the congregation in small ways or big ways to help them perceive that, look, I am while I want to give all my heart, soul, mind, and strength to this, I can't always. And therefore, there are some things that you're going to have to just get used to, right?
One thing I can say about the Ooltewah congregation is they're a special kind of people.
Good.
They have been wonderful. For me, it's kind of reverse. Sometimes it's reminding them, hey, I'm here with what you need.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask, because they have a heart and they realize what I'm working. So they have an understanding of, hey, he's working 2 full-time jobs. He is doing all of this for the church as is. And so a lot of them won't say anything. They won't ask because they don't want to intrude on everything that I've got going on.
Good.
So sometimes it's more communicating, hey, I'm okay. I do have time to do this.
Right.
So that helps me. So I have been in situations where you come across members that they want your attention every day of the week, multiple hours, whatever they call, ready to go. But right now, I've got a great group of family that they recognize that, and they're very mindful of mine and Susan's time and everything. So they try not to intrude if they don't have to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So what can a congregation do to better encourage their bivocational minister? I mean, you talked about how great a congregation you have, and they make it easy for you. But, what advice would you give to congregations in order to support and encourage their bivocational ministers? Probably the same that for any minister, right? But
it would, to love them, be patient, understand that they've got to have a balance. And for me, some of it too is remember, yes, they're working for the church. They've got the job. But sometimes I think some members think that since they've got a job, the church don't have to do things to support the minister.
Yeah.
I don't think they're being malicious in that. I just think the mindset is, well, he's making salary here, so we don't have to do as much for him and his family. Whereas the minister is still doing everything a full-time minister is. We've just tacked on another revenue stream to help. Like in our situation, another reason we did this was multiple reasons. One, you go back to when COVID hit. For me, if it got to a point that the church had to say, look, we're hurting, we can't pay you a salary, I can go, okay, I'm good. I've still got this other income stream. We're okay. Yeah. But on the flip side too, it allows for Susan to stay at home. Yeah. My wife doesn't have to work full time. She's able to spend time with the girls, be involved with their school where they are. So that was something that worked in our favor of doing this. And with the economy doing all that it's doing, it helps. Yeah. I think it just provides a stability there.
Yeah.
That helps, but it's good for the congregation to understand that even though they have this other source of income, they're still giving a lot of their time in their life for the ministry. Yeah. And they need to find ways to support that, however that may be.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And in so many of my conversations with preachers, whether on the podcast or outside of the podcast, has been about that very thing is, am I an expense or am I an investment? And I think it's all in how you look at your preacher, whether bivocational or otherwise. Is he an expense or is he an investment? And, I think there's long been a reputation of churches that we're going to try to get a guy on the cheap. And thankfully, I see that changing. But, we were having this discussion the other day and bringing in guest speakers for like a summer series and things like that. And, the conversation was had that you're not just paying a guy mileage. you're paying him to come up with the lesson that you've given him, the topic you've given him, and the hours that he has spent. And maybe he has one on file that he can pull up or whatever. But I don't think we always recognize the time and effort and energy that goes into the things that people don't see, even behind the scenes. You get up there and you preach on Sunday. That was a great lesson. Yeah, but do you know what went into that? And then just the effort put into helping with funerals and weddings and just being a part of this family and helping them to get through things. So I think that's a really good point. Talk a little bit about, because I met you at, it was for lack of a better term, an enrichment seminar of some kind. What do we call it in the school business? These workshops, whatever it was. I don't remember the one that I met you at, but we've crossed paths at many different workshops and things of that nature. I was surprised to hear you say, you don't get to do as many of those like other, because I see you at all of them just about. So talk about how that helps with being around other preachers, learning from other guys. I know it helps me tremendously. It's got to be a big benefit to you as well.
Oh, it is. And that comes back. I am fortunate to be able to do a lot of those things because of the flexibility.
Yeah.
Now, am I always working? Unfortunately, yes,
Yeah.
taking work calls, different things. But I can do that over the phone and be able to travel and do some of that. So that's where that comes in. Sometimes I don't get to do certain things if I've got to be here for meetings or whatnot. But I think it helps with my identity as a preacher that I talked about that sometimes can creep in and be a struggle, because it gives me an opportunity to go and fellowship with other ministers and see some of the struggles and go, oh, well, I'm struggling with the same thing. It just lets me know I'm not alone on an island, that I'm not trying to, I'm not isolated. I think sometimes it's easy to feel isolated when you are bivocational because you can't get out as much as others can. So I'm fortunate with that, but I see other guys that have done it. They can't leave and go and do things. Therefore, you feel alone that, hey, are there other ones that are going through the same thing that I am? We do so very much for ministers as a whole, but as this bivocational side grows, what are we doing to help support them in that? I think it's a great thing. I think you are seeing a growth. I think I saw a statistic not too long ago saying it's about 25 to 30% now of ministers are bivocational.
Yeah.
But, I've talked to other ministers talking about how good it would be for these young guys that are coming straight out of college to go ahead and learn a trade, learn something. Maybe you don't use it, maybe you do, but so many times I've heard something happens with the minister, they get let go, they're tied into the community, but they've been preaching for 15, 20 years, but they know how to do nothing else.
Yeah.
And here they've got to start completely over from scratch on everything. And that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
But if they come out, learned a trade, did something, even if they didn't use it for a while, at least it's still in their back pocket that they can use.
Yeah.
So that's another thing I think churches could help support in is encourage to go out and do different things.
Yeah, because it is more the norm than we think sometimes. I think we feel like maybe that this is the exception to the rule when it's not so much. Like you said, 25, 30%, but there are a lot of preachers out there that are, like you said, have a couple different income streams, and their preaching is a part of that, but they're also doing something else because we just don't have enough capable men to fill those spots. And so I think you're going to see an increase in it more and more. Tell us a little bit as we wrap up here. If you could give any advice to bivocational ministers, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to them?
Guard your time and keep your family number one.
Yeah.
That's probably, in guarding your time, guard your study time.
Yeah.
That you're spending in the Word. One thing over the years that sometimes becomes a struggle is you're having different things going on within the congregation that you're reaching out to multiple people, trying to stay on top of what they've got going on. But that never fails that as you're dealing with all that, everything on the work side is busy as well. And so if you're not careful, by the time you get Sunday's always going to come around every week. So by the time Friday and Saturday rolls around, you're like, oh, well, I hadn't really spent as much time studying as I wanted to. Yeah. You've got to guard that time. Yeah. You got to find that time during the week that is always going to be there, that you can study and soak it in and do that. Not only studying for your sermon, but studying for your own self and your own faith. And then too, you've got to keep your family as a top priority. That's easy to lose focus on too. You don't want your kids to look at you and go, well, Daddy's always at work, whether it be at church or in the secular world. So that's important. That would be my top two. And then the third one, rest.
Yeah.
Find time to rest.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think that's good for all ministers, bivocational or otherwise. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. Appreciate everyone's attentiveness to this podcast. If you have a question, I want to let you know that you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a question specifically for Denny, then we'll pass it on to him, and I'm sure he'd be glad to answer it for you. Share the news about the podcast. We're on the different platforms, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts. Just appreciate you so much tuning in. Appreciate you joining us, Dean. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.